Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are picking up with DCeased, DC's Zombies event. And in reality, I feel like it was only ever a matter of time before we saw that. I mean, to a degree, we got Blackest Night, but Blackest Night was more of a Green Lantern event than it was. I mean, it didn't involve all of DC, but that was more of like, we're not doing this for the sake of doing zombies. We're doing this because we want to bring some characters back and other characters we want to leave dead, right? Like Blackest Night brought back pretty much everybody who died, and then like Brightest Day basically kept the ones they wanted. But this is just a straight up like zombies event. Like that's really all this is. It's just like a straight up DC zombie story. And it starts in one of the coolest ways ever. What this does is it initially picks up with Darkseid. Now we get this kind of narrative that goes through there. Like, you know, my mother always used to say there was never any such thing as monsters and so on. But it's interesting because Tom Taylor's the one writing this. And here's the thing about Tom Taylor. Tom Taylor is really, really good at writing stories that are basically something akin to like post-apocalyptic, or if like things are going crazy, right? Like when it comes to something like this is where Tom Taylor really, really, really shines. And this is kind of cool because it initially picks up with like Darkseid invading Earth, right? Like, and you got some cool characters here that you wouldn't normally see. Like you've got Black Lightning who's here, and then you have your standard fare of the Justice League. Now remember, this is like a whole different universe in DC. This is not an in-continuity story as far as I'm aware. It's basically like a what if story from Marvel. So because of that, some of the characters do look a little bit different, but you basically have Darkseid showing up here and like the Justice League defeats him, right? Which is what you would expect, right? I mean, usually whenever Darkseid shows up, it's kind of like the Justice League fights him for a little bit, then they defeat him, and then that's basically the end of that. What's kind of ironic about this, and this is kind of a funny thing, what's kind of ironic about this is, remember, in the DC multiverse, there's only one Darkseid, and he's currently in Justice League Odyssey. So this is one of those scenarios where you just kind of have to just go with it and just say what the heck ever, you know what I mean? Like, if you're a huge continuity stickler, well then I don't know what to tell you. But it is kind of cool, because when they, of course, Wonder Woman gets the lasso of truth around Darkseid, and the way this works is that those individuals who are bound by the lasso are usually like, they're forced to answer whatever question Wonder Woman asks truthfully, right? And they're usually weak, or not really weak, but they're usually like helpless within the confines of the lasso. With Darkseid, the statement is like, you will not return to our world, say it, the lasso compels you to, and Darkseid says, yes, I'm not going to come back for your world, and then he just removes the lasso, and it's like, because I have what I came for. Literally, Darkseid overpowers the lasso of truth, which is cool. But from there, we end up finding out that like no one can find Cyborg. Cyborg was in Metropolis at one point along the line. He was basically helping to like deal with all the parademons and all that kind of stuff that came with like Darkseid's invasion, but nobody knows where Cyborg is anymore. And that's presumably what Darkseid came for. Now, one of the cool little things that go on here, this is kind of important, is a little bit of character building. This is one of the reasons why I say that Tom Taylor is really good at this. Tom Taylor is very good at capturing the nature of characters, and no matter what story they're in, making sure they stay true, right? Like Batman's the guy who doesn't trust anyone. And so it's almost Tower of Babel-esque in the sense that like Batman pulls up his device and says like Cyborg's nowhere around here. And they're like, well, how do you know that? And it's like, because I put a tracking device on him. Because the guy's got apocalyptic technology. He's basically like a walking mother box. He's essentially like a crazy weapon. It'd be stupid to leave him here. And there's a bit of distrust that comes from the rest of the Justice League. Like, really, man? You're still doing this after all this time? But it makes sense. It's the nature of Batman's character. Now, from here, we switch over to Apocalypse proper. Now, remember, Apocalypse is a world of pain and suffering. It's really all it is. It's the equivalent of hell in the realm of DC, right? Like, you've got Highfather on New Genesis, which is supposed to be equivalent to heaven, but Highfather's kind of a dick. And then you have Apocalypse, which is supposed to be something akin to hell. It's not actually heaven and hell. Those do exist in DC in the Vertigo line. But in terms of the main DC superheroes, which you never really see the concept of like Vertigo with like the Presence and then Lucifer Morningstar and those characters, because you never see them cross over with the main DC superheroes, they're largely considered to be kind of isolated and on their own, even though they're really not. And so because of that, Apocalypse and New Genesis is about as close as you get to heaven and hell. But because this is a place of suffering and torment, it's literally Cyborg being hooked up to a torture machine and then basically being asked questions. And this is where the revelation comes from, that what Darkseid had been pursuing was the same thing he'd always been pursuing, which is the anti-life equation. Now, again, Tom Taylor really like kind of knocking it out of the park here. It's designed to bring in new readers. People who have never really read DC and specifically have never really read anything about the New Gods won't know what the anti-life equation is. The anti-life equation is a mathematical proof that if you can basically find it and if you can use it, you can dominate the will of all sentient beings in the universe. It's what Darkseid's always been hunting for. It's what he found during the events of Final Crisis. Like it's a major part of the DC landscape. Now, but where Darkseid has had one half of the equation, which is to say, if we were to use slope, the equation y equals mx plus b, then what Darkseid basically has is mx plus b. He doesn't have y. And so what he's doing is looking for the other half of the equation. He's looking for y, and it seems to have manifested itself inside of Cyborg. Now, the nature of the anti-life equation is kind of strange, right? Like the equation is a mathematical proof, but it's also sort of a biological concept. If you solve it and use it, it has a tangible effect and it'll spread like a virus. And that's exactly what happens. Darkseid basically takes the anti-life equation and then he in turn summons death. And then in doing so, summoning the Black Racer, he basically takes the anti-life equation and merges it with an aspect of death. Essentially, like, I guess maybe this twisted perception that the anti-life equation can be used to kill everyone. But because of that, because the anti-life equation has been merged with death, it basically corrupts the equation. And when it does, it sends Darkseid spiraling out, right? Like he just basically loses his mind and succumbs to absolute and pure madness. And like literally the Black Racer is like time for God to die. And DCeased, because of the fact that he's basically immune to any kind of viruses or anything like that, any kind of disease, he's not infected by basically this corrupted anti-life equation. But in realizing what it's doing to Darkseid, sends Cyborg away in hopes that it'll basically fix Darkseid. Now, of course, this sends Cyborg back to Earth, but at the same time, Darkseid loses his mind and then destroys the entirety of Apokolips and wipes all of it out. And so when Cyborg lands back on Earth, he brings the corrupted anti-life equation with him, and that's how the zombie infection spreads. It's actually a genius idea. A virus that's designed to bend others to its will, and then in turn merge it with death, basically bends others to its will and turns them into the Walking Dead. It is super cool, and it really, really works. But kind of drawing from Final Crisis, because of the fact that the anti-life equation is a mathematical proof, and because of the fact that Cyborg is a walking, talking cybernetic organism that basically taps into the internet, the anti-life equation, the corrupted equation, basically leaves him and goes into the internet. It turns into Skynet and literally spreads everywhere. It goes all over the place, to every single form of social media, to everybody's phones, spreads like wildfire. So it's very similar to what you saw in spreading the anti-life equation in Final Crisis, which again makes sense. But because of the fact that the world is so plugged into social media, those looking at Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, the whole nine yards, are all basically blasted with this virus, and in turn are basically hit with like the corrupted version of the anti-life equation. And in doing so, like they all basically succumb to like these zombie monster things. But basically, Cyborg is the one that starts off that sets off the whole zombie apocalypse. But it's kind of interesting here because in turn, like you have Superman talking to Scott Free, talking to Big Barda, of course, Mr. Miracle, and basically saying, hey, look guys, like, we got to find Cyborg, so on and so forth. But in the middle of all that, he basically takes off because all he hears is screaming, only to realize like this whole virus thing is spread across the world. Now, Superman doesn't initially know why all this is happening. And it's one of these things that Tom Taylor kind of passes over, right? Like that's one of the downsides to Tom Taylor. Tom Taylor can like hop, skip, and jump from point to point to point and not fill in the gaps and then kind of leave you asking questions of, well, but like how though? And like what seems to have happened is between the time like Superman went out there and the world was screaming and the time that we pick up with Jonathan, Lois, and Damian Wayne, that basically Superman figured out that this virus is being spread digitally. Now, we can kind of make some assumptions here. So maybe like in this universe, Final Crisis happened and like Superman says, okay, this seems to be like the anti-life equation spreading through the digital sphere like it did in Final Crisis. It could be Superman just like analyzing these guys using whatever vision he has, but regardless of the scenario, Superman comes to the realization that it's spreading through TV and social media. And so of course we have Jonathan going to find his mom's phone and so on and so forth. As soon as he picks it up, Superman destroys it when he flies in through the window and then destroys the TV screen and says, nobody look at anything. Everybody close your eyes, chill, everybody relax. From there, you switch over to Batman. And this is one of the coolest parts. So Batman, being the detective that he is already on the case, right? Like Gotham's basically is lost. Batman shuts down like the entire connection of Wayne Manor to the internet. So the Batcave is not connected to any of the internet. In turn, he has all these redundant loops. He's got Gotham City on close system cameras. So basically, he shuts himself off from the world and then in turn starts analyzing all the footage that he sees and realizes like the whole place is going to pot. And when the question is how many people are infected right now, an estimated 600 million people have been infected in the first day. The entire world's population will be infected in a couple days. And basically, that's it. It's game over. And it's cool because from there, Batman basically issues like the EMP for Wayne Manor, shuts down the power to everything, and then is essentially just kind of walking blind. But technology has become the enemy of the world. And that's one of the cool things about Tom Taylor is there's always kind of a moral tale, right? I mean, Grant Morrison is similar to that. And I bring him up because of we've been talking about Final Crisis. The problem with Grant Morrison is nobody understands what Grant Morrison is doing except for himself and people who are fans who think they know what Grant Morrison is doing. They're just, whatever. But regardless of the circumstance, like there's always kind of a moral cautionary tale when it comes to Tom Taylor stories. And it's the internet is the enemy of the world. Like social media is the enemy enemy of the world, which technically is not wrong. But what you end up having is like this kind of discussion between Lois and Superman, Damian and Jonathan, and it's like, where's Batman? Like, is Batman gonna make it? And this is kind of cool to see, because one of the things that really sort of made Damian such an interesting character is that while he is cold-blooded and ruthless and is an insanely talented killer, the fact remains he's still a kid. And it's cool to see that child part of him come out. He's worried about his dad. Is my dad going to be okay? I love the way that's done. And so what you end up doing is basically picking up with like Batman kind of making his way through Wayne Manor and looking for Alfred and looking for Tim Drake. No, I'm sorry, Dick is who he's looking for. Tim Drake is who he's also looking for. But what Batman ends up finding, like once he finds Alfred, who thankfully is okay, Dick Grayson is not. Dick Grayson has been turned into a zombie. So basically we have Batman versus zombie Dick Grayson. And it's kind of cool. It's pretty awesome to see. But in the middle of this whole fight, where you have Dick Grayson, suddenly you're met with the arrival of like Tim Drake. And so basically you've got zombie Tim Drake, you've got zombie Dick Grayson. Batman's made to face off against the both of them. He tells Alfred to run for his life. And like the last thing we see is Dick Grayson taking a chunk out of Batman's neck. Dick Grayson kills Batman. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button. Oh, cliffhangers. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like and I will catch you all later. Cliffhangers. Peace.